Victor Langston was 71 years old when he nearly signed away everything he had ever built. For most of his life, Victor believed in order. Work hard. Stay disciplined. Protect your family. In the end, loyalty would return what you invested in it. That philosophy carried him through 4 decades of running Langston Industrial Parts, a logistics company he started in a rented warehouse after his wife, Mary Ann, passed away from cancer. He built the company not out of ambition but survival. Later, he built it for his only daughter. Ava Langston was 42. Intelligent, strategic, sharp in a way that often felt like impatience sharpened into a weapon. She joined the company 8 years earlier and never hid her opinion that Victor held control longer than necessary. She believed in expansion, risk, bold acquisition. Victor believed in stability. The invitation came on a quiet Sunday afternoon in late September. "Dad, let's have dinner at your place," Ava said over the phone. "We need to discuss long-term planning. Nothing dramatic, just the future." The word future lingered in Victor's mind long after the call ended. He agreed. The evening air was cool, the first signal that summer had officially surrendered. Victor set the dining room carefully, the same oak table that had hosted birthdays, graduations, and once, decades earlier, a fragile anniversary dinner when Mary Ann was still alive. At 6 sharp, Ava arrived with her husband, Marcus Reed. Marcus carried a bottle of wine and a pleasant smile that never quite reached his eyes. He worked as a financial consultant, though Victor had never fully understood the specifics of his practice. Marcus specialized, he said, in wealth optimization. Victor preferred simpler language. They settled into the dining room, plates arranged neatly, candles flickering. Conversation began politely. Market trends. Supply chain shifts. Inflation. Nothing unusual. Halfway through the main course, Ava placed her napkin down carefully. "Dad," she began, tone measured, "you've done more than enough. The company is stable, profitable, but it needs unified direction." "Oh my goodness," Clara said quickly, already reaching for napkins. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Langston." Marcus's jaw tightened for a fraction of a second. Ava inhaled sharply. "Clara, please be more careful." But Clara leaned close to Victor as she blotted the spill. Her voice barely moved. "Do not drink that. Please trust me." Victor's pulse shifted. Not fear. Recognition. He placed the empty glass upright on the table. "It's fine," he said calmly. "Accidents happen." Marcus forced a small laugh. "I can pour another." "No," Victor replied, wiping his hands slowly. "I think wine is enough for tonight." The room changed after that. Conversation continued, but something beneath it had fractured. Marcus spoke faster. Ava emphasized efficiency. They redirected him repeatedly to signature lines inside the folder. Victor listened, and he watched. Ava avoided eye contact whenever the drink was mentioned. Marcus never offered to taste it himself. Clara stayed in the doorway longer than necessary. Victor felt slightly warm, lightheaded, not dramatic, but noticeable. He had only taken a small sip. He set the pen down without signing. "I'm tired," he said evenly. "We'll review this with my attorney next week." Marcus's smile thinned. Ava's disappointment surfaced quickly, then disappeared just as fast. "Of course," she said. Dinner ended early. When the door closed behind them, Victor remained seated at the table. Clara returned quietly. "I saw him add something before dinner," she said. "To what?" "The bottle." "I couldn't see what. But it wasn't there when he arrived." Victor absorbed the information without visible reaction. "Why didn't you say something immediately?" he asked gently. "I needed to be sure," Clara replied. "And I needed you not to confront them without protection." Protection. The word felt heavier than unexpected ever had. Victor stood slowly. "Call Dr. Henley," he said. "Tell him I'm coming in tonight." Within 2 hours, blood samples were drawn. By morning, preliminary results confirmed the presence of a slow-acting anticoagulant compound, small dose, but deliberate. Not enough to kill immediately. Enough to weaken, to destabilize. Repeated doses could cause internal bleeding that resembled natural medical decline. Victor sat in the sterile office, hands folded. "How long?" he asked the doctor. "Based on trace levels? This isn't the first exposure." Victor thought about recent months. Fatigue, unusual bruising, moments of disorientation he had blamed on age. Clara had started keeping notes weeks earlier. Dates, meals, who prepared drinks. The pattern aligned. Sunday dinners, business discussions.
Signature request.
It was not impulsive. It was progressive. Victor did not confront Ava immediately. Instead, he called his attorney, then a forensic accountant, then the police. The financial review uncovered small asset reallocations. Insurance policies opened quietly. Beneficiary adjustments drafted, but not finalized. Contingency planning in case of sudden incapacitation. His incapacitation. When detectives interviewed Ava and Marcus 3 days later, they arrived with rehearsed concern. "It must be a misunderstanding," Ava said smoothly. "Dad has been confused lately." Marcus nodded. "Stress can distort memory." Victor watched them from across the room. He felt no rage, only clarity. The lab confirmed sustained exposure over months. The digestive from Sunday contained triple concentration. If he had finished the glass, internal bleeding could have triggered a fatal cardiac event within days. Accidental. Natural.
Clean.
The arrest happened quietly on a Thursday afternoon. Marcus first. Ava second. She looked at her father once as officers secured her hands. Not with guilt. With calculation. As if trying to determine whether something could still be salvaged. There was nothing left to salvage. Victor returned home that evening and sat in the dining room alone. The tablecloth had been replaced. The candles removed. The folder still rested where he had left it. He opened it again, slower this time. Buried deep in legal language was full asset transfer upon medical declaration of cognitive impairment. Signed by him, it would have required only one supporting physician's note. Marcus had professional connections. Victor closed the folder carefully. He looked toward the kitchen where Clara stood quietly. "You saved my life," he said. She shook her head. "I paid attention." Victor understood something then that unsettled him more than the poison. The plan had not depended on violence. It depended on narrative. On convincing him he was aging faster than he was. On making weakness believable. The betrayal had been structured like a business deal. That night, Victor made a decision. He would not simply survive this. He would dismantle it completely. He poured himself a glass of plain water, drank it slowly, and began preparing for the next move. The arrests did not bring Victor Langston peace. They brought silence. A different kind of silence than the one that had filled his house after Marion died. That silence had been grief. This one was structural, like a building after the wiring has been ripped out, intact on the outside, hollow within. By the time news of Ava and Marcus's arrest reached the business press, Victor had already taken control of the narrative. A short statement was released through his attorney, an internal family matter under investigation. Operations remained stable. Leadership unchanged. He refused to let scandal weaken the company he built. But privately, the investigation deepened in ways that unsettled him more than the poisoning itself. Detective Roland Pierce, lead investigator, visited Victor's home 2 days after the arrests. Pierce was methodical, quiet, with the steady tone of a man who believed details revealed character. "We need to walk through the last 6 months carefully," Pierce said. "Not emotionally. Chronologically." Victor agreed. Clara joined them at the dining table, the same table where the digestive had nearly ended his life. She brought her notebook. It was small, leather-bound, edges worn from constant handling. I started documenting in April, Clara explained. Mr. Langston's fatigue was inconsistent. Some days he was sharp for 12 hours. Other days he struggled by noon. Pierce nodded. What made you suspect external influence? The timing, she said simply. Symptoms followed specific interactions. They reviewed dates. April 14th, Sunday dinner. Ava prepared tea. That night Victor experienced unusual dizziness. April 28th, business meeting at Ava's home. Marcus poured wine. Victor developed unexplained bruising 3 days later. May 19th, private lunch. Ava insisted on a health tonic. Victor reported nausea. Each instance alone was forgettable. Together, they formed intention. Pierce placed lab results beside Clara's notes. Trace anticoagulants appear in increasing concentrations over time, he said. Small. Controlled. Enough to weaken, not alarm. Victor listened without visible reaction. What would the final stage have looked like? He asked. Pierce met his eyes. Internal hemorrhaging. Likely mistaken for natural cardiac failure in a man your age. Victor absorbed the clinical explanation. Natural. That word had nearly erased him. The financial forensic report arrived the next morning. Victor sat in his office overlooking the warehouse floor while accountant Lillian Cho explained the findings. Several shell accounts were opened under layered LLC structures, she said, projecting spreadsheets onto a screen. Funds transferred from secondary subsidiaries, always below regulatory reporting thresholds. Victor recognized Marcus's precision in the strategy. Total amount averted? He asked. Just over $4 million across 18 months. Not reckless theft. Calculated extraction. They were preparing for liquidity upon your incapacitation, Lillian added. Once operational control transferred, larger movement would have appeared legitimate. Victor stood and walked toward the window. Forklifts moved below in orderly patterns. Employees worked without awareness of how close the company had come to silent collapse. They weren't rushing, he murmured. They were stabilizing their exit. That afternoon, Detective Pierce returned with a search warrant inventory list from Marcus's office. Insurance policies. 3 separate life insurance contracts taken out within the past year, all naming Ava Langston as primary beneficiary. Medical consultation records with a private physician known for expedited cognitive evaluations. Victor read the physician's name twice. He had met the man once at a fundraising gala. Would a cognitive impairment declaration have been difficult to obtain? Victor asked. Pierce shook his head slowly. With staged symptoms and selective reporting? Not necessarily. The plan crystallized. Slow chemical weakening. Subtle behavioral framing. Medical confirmation of decline. Legal activation of transition documents. Asset consolidation. Unnatural death. Efficient.
Corporate.
The betrayal no longer felt emotional. It felt strategic. That realization disturbed Victor more than rage would have. Later that week, he attended his first court hearing. Ava stood in a neutral-colored suit, composed. Marcus looked thinner already, less polished, without controlled lighting and tailored optics. The prosecution outlined charges: attempted murder, conspiracy, financial exploitation, fraud. When the anticoagulant was named in open court, a ripple moved through the gallery. Victor did not look at his daughter. He studied the defense table instead. Marcus whispered instructions. Ava nodded minimally. Still coordinated. Still calculating. Bail was denied. The evidence was too structured. Too layered. Too deliberate. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. Victor gave no statement. He returned home and made a different decision. He requested a full medical evaluation independent of any physician previously consulted. The results confirmed prolonged exposure, but no irreversible damage. "You were fortunate," Dr. Henley said. "Another few weeks at increasing dosage could have caused permanent organ damage." Fortunate. Victor thought of Clara's steady hand knocking the glass aside. Fortune had nothing to do with it. Attention had saved him. That evening, he and Clara sat in the kitchen.
No candles.
No wine. Only plain tea brewed together, ingredients measured openly. "Why didn't you leave when you suspected?" Victor asked her. Clara considered carefully. "Because if I left, they would accelerate," she said. "And you would trust them." Victor nodded slowly. Trust had been the infrastructure of the plan. Not just poison. Narrative. They had encouraged him to step back from daily operations. Suggested executive fatigue. Subtly questioned his memory in meetings. Twice, Ava had corrected him on minor details that later proved accurate. Plant doubt. Reinforce vulnerability. Make decline believable. It was psychological architecture. The following week, prosecutors uncovered encrypted messages between Ava and Marcus. Not emotional exchanges. Logistics. Dosage increase Sunday. Insurance confirmation pending. Doctor aligned.
No effectsgen. No hesitasgen.
Just process. Victor attended the evidentiary hearing quietly. When audio recordings were played, Marcus discussing timeline projections, the courtroom grew still. 6 to 9 months max, Marcus's recorded voice said. Natural trajectory. Ava's reply followed. Make sure Dad doesn't suspect acceleration. Victor closed his eyes briefly. He did not cry. Grief would come later. Right now, clarity mattered more. The defense attempted reframing. Stress. Misinterpretation. Financial misunderstanding.
But the pattern was documented.
Structured. Data does not bend easily. Outside court, analysts debated motive. Inheritance disputes were not uncommon. But slow poisoning under corporate cover drew national attention. Victor declined interviews. Instead, he began restructuring the company. He removed Ava from all corporate filings permanently, installed an independent oversight board, created mandatory dual-signature protocols for executive decisions. If he had learned anything, it was this. Control must never concentrate unchecked, even within family. 3 weeks after the arrests, Victor visited the warehouse floor personally. Employees looked at him with cautious curiosity. Rumors had circulated. He gathered department heads in the conference room. "I am not retiring," he said plainly. "Operations continue. Leadership remains accountable." He did not elaborate. He did not need to. Stability radiated more powerfully than explanation. That night, alone in his study, Victor opened an old photo album. Ava at age 6, holding a cardboard sign that read "Best Dad Ever." Ava at 12, sitting in his office chair pretending to sign contracts. Ava at 22, graduation day. He searched the images for warning signs. There were none. Entitlement does not announce itself early. It grows quietly where admiration once lived. Victor closed the album. The court date for trial was set. Months away. Time to prepare. Time to dismantle. Time to ensure the narrative would not be rewritten. Clara entered the study softly. "You should rest," she said. Victor looked at her, not as employee, not as assistant, as the person who had intervened when intervention carried risk. "They underestimated you," he said quietly. Clara allowed herself a faint smile. "They underestimated you too." Victor leaned back in his chair. The poison had been subtle, the betrayal clinical, but the survival would not be accidental. It would be deliberate. And this time he would be the one setting the terms. The trial began in early spring. By then, the story had grown beyond a private family scandal. Business publications framed it as a cautionary tale about succession warfare. Legal analysts dissected the financial schemes on evening news panels. Commentators debated whether greed or resentment had been the primary catalyst. Victor Langston ignored them all. He entered the courthouse on the first day without expression, dressed in a charcoal suit he had worn to board meetings for years. The building's stone facade felt impersonal, severe, appropriate for what would unfold inside. The courtroom was colder than he expected. Not physically, but emotionally. It felt stripped of illusion. Every word spoken there would be measured. Nothing sentimental would survive cross-examination. Ava sat beside her attorney, posture straight, eyes forward. She had lost some of her polish in custody. The confidence remained, but it was sharpened differently now, defensive rather than ambitious. Marcus appeared thinner, his movements more contained. He avoided scanning the gallery. He studied paperwork instead, as though still convinced this was an audit he could outmaneuver. Victor did not sit in the front row. He chose a seat slightly back, centered. Close enough to see clearly. Far enough to observe without being observed too closely. The prosecution began with structure, not drama. They laid out the timeline. Month by month. Dinner by dinner. Dose by dose. A forensic toxicologist explained how the anticoagulant functioned. In small amounts, it mimicked natural aging symptoms: fatigue, disorientation, unexplained bruising. In larger concentrations, it destabilized organ function. The final dose could trigger internal bleeding that appeared spontaneous. Is this substance easily detectable in small quantities? The prosecutor asked. Not without targeted screening, the toxicologist replied. Standard tests would likely attribute symptoms to age-related conditions. The courtroom remained still. The poison was not theatrical. It was procedural. Next came financial analysis. Lillian Cho took the stand with calm precision. She displayed spreadsheets mapping the flow of funds from secondary subsidiaries into layered accounts controlled indirectly by Marcus. Each transfer was modest, each interval deliberate. Together, they formed extraction. Were these movements authorized by Mr. Langston? The prosecutor asked.
No, Lillian answered.
And the structuring indicates intentional avoidance of reporting thresholds. Marcus's attorney objected twice. Both objections were overruled. Victor watched Ava's face during the financial testimony. She did not react emotionally. She listened carefully, calculating possible interpretations. The prosecution then introduced the insurance policies. 3 separate contracts. Signed electronically. Filed within months of the initial documented poisoning. Who initiated these policies? The prosecutor asked the insurance representative. Mr. Marcus Reed. The representative confirmed. And who is listed as primary beneficiary? Ava Langston. The defense strategy emerged quickly. Marcus's attorney positioned him as the architect. Ava's attorney suggested she trusted her husband's financial guidance. Responsibility began to shift subtly across the defense table. Victor noted it. The partnership that had once appeared seamless now revealed fractures. On the 4th day, Clara Morales took the stand. She wore a simple navy suit and spoke without theatrical emphasis. She described the first time she noticed Victor's unusual fatigue pattern. She explained why she began documenting dates. She described the moment she saw Marcus handling the bottle before dinner. Why didn't you confront them immediately? The defense attorney asked. Because suspicion is not proof, Clara replied calmly. And confrontation without proof would have accelerated risk. The courtroom registered the weight of that statement. Accelerated risk. Clara detailed how she knocked the glass from Victor's hand intentionally. Gasps were minimal but present. Did you fear retaliation? The prosecutor asked gently. Yes, Clara said. But I feared his death more. Victor felt something tighten in his chest then. Not grief. Recognition. The defense attempted to undermine her credibility. Isn't it true, Ava's attorney asked, that you would lose employment if Mr. Langston transferred control? Yes, Clara answered. So, you had financial incentive to prevent that transfer. Clara held steady. My employment would have ended if he died. Silence. Precision dismantled insinuation more effectively than anger. The prosecution saved the recordings for the second week. Encrypted messages had been recovered from Marcus's devices. A digital forensics specialist explained the decoding process. Then audio filled the courtroom. Marcus's voice, clinical. Gradual decline reduces suspicion. Ava's voice followed, lighter, almost amused. He already thinks he's slowing down. Victor did not look at her. He looked at the jury. One juror shifted uncomfortably. Another stared down at notes longer than necessary. The defense pivoted again. They argued misinterpretation of language. Suggested discussions were hypothetical. Business stress exaggerated tone. Then the private journal appeared. Recovered from a locked drawer in Ava's home office. Her handwriting. Dates aligned with Clara's notes. But hers contained something different. Dosage increments. Projected symptom intensity. Time to effect estimates. It was not a diary of concern. It was operational tracking. Ava took the stand 2 days later. She appeared composed, eyes slightly reddened. I never wanted my father harmed, she said. I was trying to protect the company. He was making erratic decisions. Did you administer any substance to your father? The prosecutor asked.
No.
Did you know Marcus was adding anticoagulants to his drinks?
No.
The prosecutor approached the evidence monitor. Displayed a message. From Ava to Marcus. Increase slightly Sunday. He questioned the last batch. The courtroom air changed. How do you explain this message? The prosecutor asked. Ava hesitated for the first time. It refers to a supplement regimen, she said. He takes many supplements. Is that why you tracked predicted cognitive decline in your journal? Silence. The pause lasted only 3 seconds. It felt longer. Victor observed the micro-expression that followed. Not sorrow. Calculation recalibrating under pressure. Marcus testified next. He attempted partial admission without full culpability. Yes, I introduced supplements, he said carefully, but not with lethal intent. Why structure financial transfers simultaneously? The prosecutor asked. Risk management, Marcus replied. Risk management for whose death? Marcus did not answer directly. The prosecution rested after 3 weeks. The defense presented character witnesses. Former colleagues described Ava as driven. Friends described Marcus as analytical. None addressed poison. Closing arguments compressed months of evidence into hours. The prosecutor stood steady. This was not impulsive, she said. It was patient, measured, structured. The defendants exploited trust, medical vulnerability, and legal complexity to engineer a death that would appear natural. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The defense emphasized doubt, suggested that complex families generate misunderstood conversations, implied that aging executives sometimes misinterpret care as control. Victor listened without visible reaction. When the judge dismissed the jury for deliberation, the courtroom exhaled collectively. Victor remained seated. He finally allowed himself to look directly at his daughter. Ava met his gaze briefly. There was no apology there, only a quiet recognition that the architecture had collapsed. The structure they built, chemical, financial, psychological, had failed because one person paid attention. Clara stood near the aisle, waiting.
Victor rose slowly.
The waiting would begin now. Not for truth. Truth had already surfaced. He would be waiting for confirmation that it could not be buried again. Outside, spring wind moved through the courthouse steps. Reporters gathered. Cameras lifted. Victor walked past them without comment. He had no interest in spectacle. Inside him, something fundamental had shifted. He no longer searched for the moment Ava changed. He understood now that entitlement grows quietly when never challenged. He had built a company strong enough to survive markets, recessions, supply chain collapses. He had not built boundaries strong enough to survive proximity without accountability. That would not happen again. As the courthouse doors closed behind him, Victor felt neither anger nor relief. Only clarity. And clarity, he realized, was stronger than either. The jury deliberated for 3 days. Victor had imagined the waiting would feel unbearable, but it was something else entirely. It was not panic. It was not even fear. It was suspension, as though time had been paused between two versions of reality, one in which justice held, and another in which narrative manipulation succeeded once again. He did not return home during those 3 days. Instead, he stayed in a private suite arranged by his attorney near the courthouse. The house felt compromised now. Not physically, the locks had been changed, security systems upgraded, but psychologically. Every room still carried the memory of quiet manipulation. Clara remained close, though not intrusive. She understood when to speak and when silence served better. On the second evening of deliberation, Victor stood by the window overlooking the city. Traffic flowed below in predictable currents. People crossed intersections unaware that inside a stone building a few blocks away, 12 strangers were deciding the final shape of his family's collapse. "Do you regret not confronting them earlier?" Clara asked quietly from across the room. Victor considered the question. "No," he said after a moment. Confrontation without proof would have become their advantage. Clara nodded. She had understood that from the beginning. The call came mid-morning on the third day. A verdict had been reached. The courtroom filled quickly. Observers returned. Reporters resumed their positions. The air felt charged, though no one spoke above a murmur. Victor entered through a side door, accompanied by counsel. He did not look toward the defense table immediately. He focused instead on the jury box, now occupied again by 12 people who had carried the weight of months of evidence into a closed room. Ava and Marcus were led in separately. That detail did not go unnoticed. They no longer walked in synchronized steps. They did not exchange glances. Whatever partnership had once fueled their precision had fractured under pressure. The judge entered. Formalities were brief. "Has the jury reached a unanimous verdict?" "Yes, Your Honor." Victor felt something steady inside him. Not hope, not dread, readiness. The foreperson stood. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree against Marcus Reed, guilty. Marcus's shoulders lowered, not in surprise but in confirmation. He had likely anticipated this. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, guilty. On the charge of financial exploitation and fraud, guilty. The words were clinical. They carried no emotion, yet they altered everything. The foreperson turned slightly. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree against Ava Langston, guilty. A subtle sound escaped somewhere in the gallery, a restrained exhale. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, guilty. On the charge of financial exploitation and fraud, guilty. Ava remained upright. Her expression did not collapse. It hardened. Victor finally looked at her. He searched for remorse. He did not find it. He found calculation replaced by inevitability. Sentencing was scheduled for the following week, but the severity of the charges made the outcome predictable. As officers secured restraints around their wrists, Ava's eyes met her father's. For the first time since the arrest, her composure cracked slightly. Not grief, not apology, recognition that the leverage she once believed she held had dissolved completely. Marcus did not look at Victor at all. He stared straight ahead, as though the courtroom had become an abstract problem he could no longer solve. Outside, cameras flashed. Inside, something settled. The following week, the courtroom reconvened for sentencing. Victim impact statements were permitted. Victor had debated whether to speak. Silence would have been easier. But silence had nearly killed him once already. He stood when called. There was no trembling in his hands. No raised voice. He spoke evenly. "I built my company after my wife died," he began. "Not for prestige. Not for expansion. I built it so my daughter would never experience insecurity." The courtroom listened without interruption. "I believed that providing stability would create loyalty. I was wrong. Stability without accountability breeds entitlement." He did not look at Ava directly, but she heard every word. "I was weakened gradually," he continued, "not only by chemicals placed in my food and drink, but by narrative. I was encouraged to doubt my memory, to question my strength, to believe that stepping aside was inevitable." He paused briefly. "What makes this crime severe is not only the attempt on my life. It is the strategy. It is the patience. It is the willingness to disguise greed as concern." He folded his hands lightly. "I forgive you," he said finally, turning toward Ava. "Not because you deserve it, but because I refuse to carry what you tried to give me." A faint reaction moved through the room. "Forgiveness does not restore trust," he added, "and it does not erase consequence." He stepped back. The judge delivered sentencing with measured authority. Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for both defendants. Financial restitution orders. Permanent prohibition from holding corporate office. The gavel fell.
It was a small sound.
Yet it marked the definitive end of something that had begun long before poison entered a glass. As they were led away, Ava looked back once more. This time, her expression held something different. Not anger.
Loss.
Not of freedom that was already gone. Loss of access. Loss of control. Loss of the future she had engineered. Victor did not wave. He did not nod. He simply remained standing. After the courtroom cleared, he remained seated longer than necessary. Clara approached quietly. "It's finished," she said. Victor shook his head gently. "No," he replied. "It's transformed." Justice had been delivered. But justice did not restore the daughter he once knew. It did not rewrite history. It did not untangle decades of memory. That evening, Victor returned home for the first time since deliberations began. The house was quiet. He walked through each room deliberately. The dining room, the study, the kitchen where the bottle had been opened. He did not rush. He allowed the weight of each space to surface and settle. Finally, he stood in the doorway of Ava's former bedroom, preserved almost untouched from years earlier. Photographs still lined the shelves. Academic awards. Childhood trophies. He understood something then with uncomfortable clarity. Love does not prevent corruption. It only delays its visibility. Victor closed the door gently. The house no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a museum of assumptions. That night, he made a decision. He would not allow this space to define the remainder of his life. The company would continue, but the house would not. He contacted a real estate broker the following morning. The sale would be discreet. No public listings.
No spectacle.
As he ended the call, Clara entered with 2 cups of tea. They selected the leaves together now, measured them openly, watched the water boil. Trust rebuilt through transparency. Victor took a slow sip. It tasted simple.
Clean.
There was no bitterness beneath it. For the first time since that Sunday dinner months ago, he felt something unexpected. Not relief. Relief implied fear had dominated. What he felt was reclamation. His life had almost been reduced to paperwork and dosage charts. Now it would be redesigned on his terms. Victor Langston did not attend the prison intake hearings. He signed the necessary restitution documents authorized asset freezes, and allowed the legal machinery to finish what it had begun. There was nothing left to argue, nothing left to interpret. The verdict had already stripped illusion from fact. Within 3 months of sentencing, the Langston house was sold quietly to a developer who intended to renovate it beyond recognition. Victor did not walk through it one final time. He understood that ritual does not always bring closure. Sometimes it reopens rooms better left sealed. He relocated to a smaller coastal town nearly 2 hours away, a place defined more by tide charts than stock reports. The property he chose was modest, a single-story home with wide windows facing the ocean. No grand dining room. No formal study. Just clean lines and open space. Clara moved with him. Not as an employee. Not under contract. When Victor had offered her the choice, she answered without hesitation. "I'm not staying because I'm paid," she said. "I'm staying because I care." That distinction mattered. The first weeks were quiet. Victor kept a reduced role in the company, operating as chairman while a newly formed oversight board managed daily operations. He instituted governance reforms that would have seemed excessive years earlier. Independent audits, rotating financial controls, mandatory transparency protocols even for family stakeholders. Trust would never again function without structure. The ocean became part of his routine. Each morning, he walked along the shoreline before sunrise. The rhythm of waves offered something he had not experienced in years, perspective unconnected to performance or expectation. One evening, seated at the kitchen table, Victor spoke what had been forming quietly in his mind. "It can't end with prison," he said. Clara looked up from her tea. "What can't?" "The lesson." He had received letters since the trial, discreet, private messages from strangers who recognized fragments of their own lives in his story. Parents who suspected subtle financial manipulation. Elderly widowers uncertain about sudden medical interventions encouraged by adult children. Quiet fear disguised as family harmony. The pattern was not rare. It was hidden. Victor began consulting legal experts specializing in elder law. He met with nonprofit advisors. He studied data on financial exploitation and domestic elder abuse. The numbers were staggering, and most cases never reached court. Within a year, the Langston Foundation for Senior Protection was formally established. Its mission was direct and unapologetic: education, legal advocacy, and emergency intervention for older adults facing financial or medical exploitation, especially by family members. Victor refused to center his own story publicly. He funded the foundation but allowed professionals to lead programming. Former prosecutors, forensic accountants, medical ethicists. Clara joined the advisory board. Her role focused on frontline awareness, training caregivers, nurses, and household staff to recognize subtle behavioral and physiological warning signs. "Most people see something before something happens," she often said during workshops. "They just doubt themselves." The foundation grew faster than expected. Hospitals partnered for early screening protocols. Banks adopted internal reporting mechanisms modeled after the forensic patterns uncovered in Victor's case. Seminars were held in community centers across multiple states. Victor attended some of them quietly, sitting in the back row. He did not seek recognition. He observed. He listened. During one session, an elderly woman approached Clara after the presentation. "I thought I was imagining it," the woman whispered. "My son insists I'm forgetful, but only when we talk about money." Clara handed her a card. "You're not imagining patterns," she said. Victor watched from a distance. This, he realized, was restitution in its truest form, not financial repayment, but interruption of repetition. 3 years passed. The company stabilized under diversified leadership. Profits remained steady. Victor reduced his direct involvement further. He no longer believed legacy meant control. Legacy meant resilience beyond him. Letters from prison arrived during the first year after sentencing. Ava wrote in precise handwriting. She did not confess. She reframed, spoke of misunderstanding, of pressure, of how events had spiraled beyond intention. Victor returned none of them. Forgiveness, he had learned, does not require proximity. After the second year, the letters stopped. He felt no relief when they did. Only neutrality. Marcus attempted appeal twice. Both were denied. The case had been too meticulously documented. 5 years after the verdict, a reporter requested an interview for an investigative documentary on financial crimes within families. Victor declined to appear on camera, but he agreed to one recorded statement. "Betrayal rarely begins with violence," he said during the audio session. "It begins with small permissions, small rationalizations, and the assumption that access equals entitlement." The documentary aired nationally. Calls to the foundation doubled. At 76, Victor's health remained stable. Annual screenings showed no lasting damage from the anticoagulant exposure. Doctors called it fortunate intervention. Victor called it attention. One evening, seated at the kitchen table facing the ocean, he and Clara shared tea as they often did. They selected the leaves together, measured the water together.
No sealed bottles. No hidden additives.
Transparency had become ritual. "Do you ever think about what would have happened?" Clara asked quietly. "Yes," Victor answered honestly. He thought about it often. If she had not knocked the glass aside, if he had signed the documents that night, if he had dismissed his fatigue as age without question, the ending would have been simple, natural, efficient. He would have been memorialized as a respected businessman who declined peacefully. Ava would have inherited control. Marcus would have executed structured consolidation. The narrative would have been seamless. Victor looked out at the horizon. "What saved me," he said slowly, "was not suspicion. It was someone refusing silence." Clara smiled faintly. "You were willing to listen. That mattered too." Many victims, Victor had learned, defend the very people dismantling them. Denial is powerful when it protects identity. Admitting betrayal requires rewriting memory. Victor had rewritten his. Not to erase Ava's childhood or the years before greed hardened her, but to separate love from blindness. The foundation expanded internationally by its 7th year. Victor stepped down as chairman of the company entirely. He remained an advisor, but no longer signed operational documents. He had learned that leadership without succession planning invites desperation. He would not create that environment again. On his 80th birthday, the foundation hosted a quiet gathering. Not a gala, not a spectacle. Survivors spoke. Caregivers shared stories of intervention. Bank managers described flagged transactions prevented in time. A physician recounted identifying anticoagulant misuse after attending one of Clara's seminars. Victor listened. He did not see himself as the center of it. He saw pattern interrupted, cycle broken. Later that night, back at the coastal house, he sat alone on the porch. The air carried salt and wind. He thought about Marianne, about the early warehouse days, about Ava at 6 years old holding a cardboard sign. Grief no longer arrived sharply. It arrived as distance. He had lost a daughter long before prison doors closed. But he had gained something else. Clarity, without bitterness. That was harder. And stronger. Inside, Clara placed 2 cups on the table. He joined her. They lifted the cups simultaneously. "To attention," Clara said softly. "To courage," Victor replied. The tea was warm, simple, uncomplicated. Years earlier, a similar glass had nearly ended his life. Now, each shared cup represented something entirely different. Not trust assumed, trust chosen. And in that difference, Victor found what remained after betrayal had burned everything unnecessary away. boundaries, purpose, and the quiet strength of listening when something or someone whispers that something is wrong. The tide moved steadily in the dark beyond the windows. Victor did not fear the silence anymore. He understood it, and he knew that as long as someone was willing to pay attention, silence would never again be weaponized against him.